Grant thought his empire was invincible, but when his new mistress revealed a hidden truth, his world crumbled. Now, as his past catches up with him, he's forced to face everything he once took for granted. Can he survive the revelations? Or is it too late to rebuild what he lost? The laughter echoing through the marble hall was the kind that made your skin crawl if you paid too much attention, too polished, too rehearsed, too fake. It was the kind of laughter that came from people who drank vintage champagne like water and used each other's secrets as currency. At the center of it all stood Grant Hawthorne, tall and broad-shouldered, with a jawline carved to impress and a smile so sharp it could slice through glass. He raised his glass high, a self-satisfied glint in his eyes as the chandelier's crystals caught the light, throwing little flecks of gold across his designer tuxedo. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, the room falling into a reverent hush. "Thank you all for being here tonight, celebrating another year of success, prosperity, and personal evolution." That word, evolution, hung in the air like perfume. Grant turned slightly, gesturing toward the breathtaking brunette on his arm, dressed in a red silk gown that clung to her body like it had been poured on. Sabrina tilted her head and smiled, her lips painted in a red so deep it almost bled under the lights. "As many of you have probably noticed," Grant continued, "there have been a few changes in my life. Some upgrades, you might say." The crowd laughed, obedient and complicit. Sabrina giggled, playing her part to perfection. Grant looked down at her, eyes gleaming, then swept the room again. His voice dipped slightly, drawing the attention of every guest like a magnet. "Of course, change doesn't come without loss. But some things, my friends, are better left in the past." He said it without blinking, but his words had weight, and they hit their mark. Near the back of the ballroom, half obscured by the extravagant floral centerpiece and a crowd of fur-draped socialites, stood Lena Hawthorne, his ex-wife. Dressed in a navy gown that was simple but elegant, with her hair pulled back to reveal a graceful neck and eyes that held the kind of calm that unnerved people. She hadn't spoken all evening. She hadn't needed to. Her presence alone had started more conversations than Grant's toast ever could. Grant's voice grew louder, theatrical. "Let's raise our glasses to new beginnings, and knowing when to trade in the old for something with a little more sparkle." A murmur of shocked amusement passed through the crowd. Someone near Lena actually gasped. But Lena didn't flinch. She simply took a slow sip from her glass, her gaze steady, unbroken. Sabrina smiled tighter now, her fingers curling around Grant's arm just a bit more possessively. Grant didn't notice. He was too busy basking in the afterglow of his cruelty, the twisted pleasure of public dominance disguised as charm. The celebration carried on with violins, canapes, and murmurs, some fawning, others speculative. Beneath the glittering surface, tension bubbled like an unchecked boil. Everyone saw it. No one dared say a word. Not yet. In a quiet corner near the dessert bar, an older woman approached Lena. She was dressed in muted emerald, her silver hair pulled into a sleek chignon, and her cane made no attempt to disguise her regal bearing. "You've got more dignity in your silence than he's ever had in his entire life," she whispered. "Don't let them forget it." Lena offered her a soft smile. "I won't." The woman patted her hand. "Good, because pride without purpose burns out fast. But revenge with patience, that rewrites the entire story." And just like that, the woman disappeared into the crowd, leaving Lena with her wine, her silence, and a mind already stitching pieces together. Meanwhile, Grant was holding court by the fireplace, a sea of admirers lapping at his every word. "What Lena and I had, it was fine, for a time," he said with a chuckle, as if referring to an outdated cell phone plan. "But Sabrina is electric. She's what you call limitless potential." He gave a wink, and Sabrina laughed on cue, eyes fluttering just so. Jason, Grant and Lena's 17-year-old son, was standing near the hallway with a glass of soda in his hand, glaring across the ballroom at his father. His jaw was clenched so tight, he looked like he might crack a molar. He hadn't spoken to his father in months, and tonight only confirmed why. He watched as his dad used words like knives and smiled as they bled people dry. Lena approached quietly and laid a hand on Jason's shoulder. "Don't let him win twice," she said softly. Jason turned to her, his voice low but sharp. "You should have walked out the moment he started that speech." "I've walked away from worse," she replied. Besides, I wanted him to see me standing. Jason's eyes softened. He hated what his father had become, but he admired what his mother had survived. They didn't say anything else. They didn't have to. Back inside the ballroom, Sabrina excused herself to go freshen up, leaving Grant surrounded by people he barely liked but relied on. Investors, politicians, a couple of actors he couldn't remember the names of but was sure they'd be on a magazine cover by morning. One of them asked how he was feeling post-divorce. Grant grinned, like I just stepped out of a cage. Wasn't your ex the one who helped you open your second company? The man asked, his tone too curious to be casual. Grant shrugged. She knew how to keep things in order. That's not hard to replace. You hire a good assistant. The man didn't laugh. Instead, he raised his brow and said, Careful, Grant. Sometimes the ones we dismiss are the ones writing our eulogy. The words didn't land until hours later. As the evening wound down, the crowd thinning and champagne flutes dwindling to sticky remnants, Grant stepped out to the veranda. The cool breeze kissed his cheeks, and for a moment, he was alone. He lit a cigar, took a long drag, and looked over the sprawling city. This was his kingdom. He'd built it from the ground up. With vision, with sacrifice. If some collateral damage had been involved, so be it. You didn't become a millionaire by being kind. He heard the sound of heels approaching behind him. Turning, he expected Sabrina. It wasn't. It was Lena. The wind teased a strand of her hair loose as she stepped up beside him, her hands folded in front of her, her gaze steady on the skyline. For a moment, neither said a word. Then, quietly, she spoke. You've made quite the impression tonight. Grant laughed dryly. I usually do. But here's the thing about impressions, she continued. They're only surface deep. Eventually, people start asking about what lies beneath. Grant narrowed his eyes. What exactly are you implying? Lena smiled, not with bitterness, but with something eerily close to pity. Nothing, Grant. Not yet. She turned and walked away, disappearing back into the soft hum of the party. Grant stayed on the veranda, cigar forgotten, the echo of her words clinging to him like mist. Later that night, when Sabrina returned to his side, her lipstick freshly reapplied, she leaned in close and whispered, I hope you know, baby, I'd never humiliate you like that. Grant chuckled and kissed her cheek. But something about Lena's presence had left a chill in his bones that even Sabrina's warmth couldn't melt. Back at her apartment, Lena removed her earrings in front of the mirror. She studied her reflection carefully. Then, she reached into her drawer and pulled out a small notebook, leather-bound, worn on the edges, and filled with scribbled names. She flipped to a blank page and wrote, Phase 1 complete. Let them laugh. She closed the book and turned out the light. Wow, that was intense, right? What do you think will happen next to Grant? Do you think he can recover from this? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know how you'd rate this video, between 0 and 10. Also, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more twists and turns. Your support helps us keep making content like this. And, hey, if you want to send some love or have your thoughts read out loud in the next video, Super Chat donations are always appreciated. Stick around for more surprises. This story isn't over yet. Rain tapped softly against the window of Lena's modest apartment, a gentle rhythm that seemed to echo the beat of her thoughts. She sat at the small dining table, her hands wrapped around a cup of lukewarm tea she hadn't taken a sip from in over 10 minutes. The glow from the city lights filtered through the curtains, casting shadows that danced on the peeling wallpaper and crept silently across the floor like memories she couldn't erase. The hum of the refrigerator was the only other sound in the room, steady, low, and oddly comforting in its consistency. It was the opposite of everything Grant represented. She had returned home from the party hours ago, yet the night still clung to her like a heavy shawl. The weight of Grant's voice, the arrogance of his toast, and the carefully disguised jabs in his words echoed in her head like an old wound reopening. She wasn't angry. Not yet. No, what she felt was deeper, something slow, deliberate, and electric beneath the surface. She'd smiled through it all, but now her lips were still, her expression unreadable. In the next room, Jason slammed his bedroom door. She didn't flinch. A few seconds later, he emerged, shirt untucked, tie hanging loose around his neck, his shoes still on. He's a pig, he muttered, walking straight to the kitchen and yanking open the fridge. A total pig. Lena raised her eyes from the tea. Language. Jason scoffed, grabbing a bottle of water. You're seriously going to defend him? After what he did tonight? I'm not defending anyone, she said calmly. But I'm not wasting my energy hating him either. Jason leaned against the counter, his jaw tight, arms crossed. You should. He stood there and humiliated you in front of an entire room full of people, and you acted like it didn't even matter. That's the point, she replied, finally taking a small sip. He wants a reaction. If I'd stormed out, if I'd cried, if I'd done anything dramatic, it would have been exactly what he wanted. Instead, I stood my ground. I was there. I watched him reveal exactly who he is, and I never had to lift a finger. Jason shook his head. You don't get it. People saw that. They're going to think he was right. Lena stood slowly, walked over, and placed a hand on his shoulder. People always think things, but time has a way of making them rethink everything. You can't chase everyone's opinion, Jason. It'll bury you. He looked away, frustration written all over his face. You don't deserve this, Mom. You gave up your whole life for him. She smiled, a tired kind of smile. Then I guess it's time to take it back. Her phone buzzed on the table, interrupting the moment. She glanced at the screen. Unknown number. She let it ring once more, then answered. Hello. A pause. Then a voice, familiar, male, low. Lena. She froze. The air shifted. Her grip on the phone tightened. Who is this? You don't remember me? That hurts. A soft chuckle. But I remember you. And I remember what Grant took from me. From both of us. She stepped away from Jason and turned her back to him. Why are you calling me? Because I think it's time someone took Grant down a notch. And I believe we both have unfinished business. Lena's voice was barely above a whisper. This isn't a good time. It never is, the man replied. But you'll want to hear what I know. About her. Lena's eyes narrowed. Her who? The mistress. He hung up. Lena stared at the dark screen, heart pounding not from fear, but something else, something sharper. She turned slowly, walked back to the table, and set the phone down as if it had suddenly grown heavy. Jason eyed her curiously. Everything okay? She nodded. Yes. Then after a pause. I think it's time we moved forward. He tilted his head. Moved forward how? I mean, I've spent enough time playing it safe, worrying about the next hit from your father. I think it's time I start fighting back. Jason's eyes lit up slightly, though he tried to hide it. What does that mean exactly? Lena didn't answer. Instead, she walked to the small bookshelf by the wall, pulled out an old manila folder labeled pre-marriage assets, and sat back down. She opened it slowly, leafing through old records, investment notes, land ownership claims, documents long buried under years of marital complacency. Do you remember your grandfather's farm in Delaware? She asked. Jason blinked. Barely. I was like 6 when we visited. Well, we never sold it. I just let the paperwork collect dust. Your father never cared about it. It didn't fit his portfolio. But it's in my name. And that land sits on a zone now being rezoned for commercial development. Jason sat up straighter. So, it's worth something? It's worth quite a bit, she said. And I think I've got enough leverage to remind Grant that not everything valuable walked away in heels last year. Jason watched his mother with growing admiration. She looked different tonight. Focused. Calculated. Less like someone who had just been humiliated and more like someone preparing for war. Later that night, after Jason went to bed, Lena pulled out a different phone, one she hadn't used in over a year. She dialed the number of a woman named Candace, her old college roommate who had become a financial forensic specialist. When Candace picked up, Lena wasted no time. I need you to help me dig into something. Someone. Candace corrected. Lena didn't hesitate. Yes. Her name's Sabrina Caldwell. She's with my ex-husband. There was a pause on the other end. Is this about revenge? Lena didn't blink. It's about closure. And just like that, the first step was taken. The next morning, Lena dropped Jason off at school and stopped by a quiet cafe on the other side of town. She ordered a black coffee and took a seat by the window. As she sipped, she noticed a man in a charcoal coat walking toward her table. Mid-40s, lean, well-kept beard, intelligent eyes that studied her like she was part of a chessboard. Peter Vance, he said, sliding into the seat across from her. We met briefly at a fundraiser 6 years ago. I used to manage the Lawson Trust before Grant burned that bridge. I remember, Lena said. Barely. I figured, Peter replied with a small smile. But I haven't forgotten how you handled that room. You were the only one who knew the numbers better than the CEO. Lena didn't smile back. Why did you call me? Because someone needs to stop Grant. And I think you're the only one who can. Lena raised a brow. That's quite a compliment. But why now? Peter leaned in, lowered his voice. Because your ex-husband is about to sign over control of a dormant fund worth $10 million to someone with a fake identity. Sabrina Caldwell doesn't exist. Lena's breath caught for a second. She blinked, steadying herself. What do you mean? I mean the name, the history, even her social, fabricated. The woman your ex is parading around isn't who she says she is. Lena sat back, processing. I can prove it, Peter added. But you'll need to move fast. And it has to come from you, not me. She stared out the window, the rain starting again, gentler this time. I'll need everything you have. Peter nodded. You'll have it tonight. When Lena got home that afternoon, Jason was on the couch, his backpack at his feet. You look different, he said. She hung up her coat, smoothed her hair. Do I? Yeah, he said. Like, you're not waiting anymore. Lena smiled. Just a little. I'm not. By evening, she had a folder in her hands again. But this time, it was filled with fresh printouts, names, numbers, aliases, and offshore accounts. She didn't recognize half the details, but what mattered was this. Sabrina Caldwell had never been born in Ohio. She'd never graduated from Columbia. She hadn't worked at any of the places listed on her resume. She was a ghost, and ghosts always left cold air behind. Lena closed the folder and looked out her apartment window. Across the city, the lights in Grant's mansion would be flickering on. Sabrina would be adjusting her crown. But neither of them knew what Lena was holding now, or how much colder the air was about to become. She whispered to herself, let's see how long your throne lasts. And with that, she opened her laptop and began drafting the first email. Just a few lines. Enough to open the first crack in a perfect illusion. A storm was coming. Not loud, not chaotic. A quiet storm, planned, patient, and merciless. The mansion had taken on a new atmosphere, brighter, louder, glossier. It wasn't just the redecorated foyer or the obnoxiously oversized chandelier Sabrina had insisted on installing above the staircase. It was the music that played even when no one was listening. It was the scent of imported perfumes that clung to every inch of the halls. It was the sound of her heels, always present, always announcing her dominance like a drumbeat. What had once been a space of quiet power had transformed into a showroom for something garish and performative. And Grant, for all his meticulous standards, didn't seem to mind. If anything, he leaned into it. Let her have her fun, he told his assistant one afternoon, when asked if Sabrina's upcoming birthday gala should really involve fireworks and a 10-tier cake. She brings energy into the house. The assistant didn't respond, but her silence was heavy. Sabrina had moved in 2 weeks after the party and wasted no time marking her territory. The wine cellar was reorganized to match her tastes. Grant's library, once filled with rare leather-bound classics, now held glossy fashion books and expensive scented candles. The staff were instructed to call her Miss Sabrina, and nothing less. And those who failed to adjust were quietly let go and replaced by younger, more impressionable hires. But it wasn't just the cosmetics of control that Sabrina mastered, it was access. Slowly, subtly, she began requesting information. Harmless at first. Which account does the florist charge to? Where do you store the contract files again? Grant mentioned something about a new trust. Do you know which lawyer handles that? She asked these questions in passing, always accompanied by laughter or a kiss on the cheek. But those questions added up. Within a month, Sabrina knew more about Grant's holdings than he realized. Grant, blinded by ego and the thrill of Sabrina's attention, continued handing her pieces of his empire like confetti. When she requested power of attorney for a few business errands, he shrugged it off. It's temporary. Just saves time. He explained to his lawyer, who raised both eyebrows but knew better than to push. That same evening, Grant sat with Sabrina on the back terrace, a cigar in one hand, a tumbler of whiskey in the other. The sky was turning a soft purple as dusk settled over the estate. You've changed things around here, he said, gazing at the horizon. Sabrina curled up beside him on the outdoor sofa, resting her head against his shoulder. I hope that's a good thing. It's different, he replied. She lifted her head and looked at him, eyes wide and sincere. Different bad. He shook his head slowly. No, different exciting. You've brought something Lena never had. Like what? Grant grinned. Ambition. Sabrina smiled, but something flickered behind her eyes, just for a second, before she leaned in and kissed him. "Well, I'm glad you see that." That same night, in the shadows of the estate, an older staff member quietly handed in her resignation letter and left without a word. She'd worked there since Grant's father owned the place. And in her silence, she carried decades of secrets, now no longer hers to protect. Meanwhile, Lena sat in her apartment, poring over spreadsheets and financial statements, some of which were 2 decades old. She was tracing patterns, looking for blind spots in Grant's portfolio. Candace, her college friend, had helped dig out more than expected. Offshore accounts, shell companies, a few quiet settlements with names scratched out. But most interesting were the dormant accounts. Funds established, but rarely touched, forgotten investments, trusts written off as irrelevant. And it was into one of these accounts that Sabrina had recently been added as a secondary administrator. Lena stared at the transaction history. A $50,000 wire to a logistics firm in the Caymans. A deposit from an art advisory company in Berlin. All within the past 2 weeks. She picked up her phone and dialed Peter. "I need you to pull some background on a firm called Blue Dune Holdings. And check the shipping logs for anything coming in from Rotterdam." Peter didn't even pause. "Already on it. Also, remember that photo I sent you of Sabrina last week?" "Yes." "Found a match. Name's not Sabrina Caldwell. It's Anna Marenko. Born in Latvia. Changed her name 6 years ago. Worked with 3 separate shell corporations involved in laundering funds through real estate." Lena felt her breath catch. "So she's a professional. A very good one," Peter said grimly. "And she's done this before. Twice. She attaches herself to men like Grant, gets access, and disappears before they realize the vault's been emptied." Lena stared at the dark window across from her desk, her reflection barely visible in the glass. Not this time. At the mansion, Sabrina sat cross-legged in the master bedroom, laptop open on her lap, clicking through folders Grant had unknowingly granted her access to. She hummed to herself, perfectly relaxed. Occasionally, she took notes, short phrases, amounts, account numbers, written in shorthand on a yellow legal pad she'd keep with her until the last moment. The next morning, Grant's financial advisor, a man named Owen with salt and pepper hair and a suit that always looked a size too large, called to schedule a meeting. "I'd like to review the status of the McPherson estate account," he said politely. "Some recent movement caught my attention." Grant frowned. "Why? We haven't touched that fund in 5 years." "Well, someone did. Twice this month." He paused. "Sabrina may have had the office move some things around. I gave her access." Owen didn't reply at first. Then, quietly, "May I suggest we put a temporary hold on new authorizations until we understand what's going on?" Grant bristled. "There's no need for that. I trust her." Owen's silence stretched. "Understood." Later that day, Sabrina walked into the office with Grant's signature on a new authorization form, giving her full financial rights over 2 additional entities. The receptionist looked up hesitantly. "This hasn't gone through Owen." Sabrina smiled. "Grant asked me to bring it personally. He said he'd handle the internal note." The receptionist nodded. "Right. I'll pass it along." As she walked away, Sabrina's smile slowly disappeared. Her eyes narrowed slightly, calculating. That evening, Grant and Sabrina hosted a dinner party for a handful of prominent tech investors. The dining room was lit in soft amber, the chandelier dimmed just enough to flatter the setting. Sabrina played hostess with ease, laughing at jokes, refilling wine, offering small anecdotes that hinted at exclusivity and luxury. Grant watched her, admiring her fluency in this world. She was everything Lena had refused to be: flashy, uninhibited, unapologetically opportunistic. One of the investors leaned toward Grant between courses. "She's sharp. Is she involved in your next startup?" Grant laughed. "More than you know." From the far end of the table, Sabrina caught that exchange, and her expression twitched. Barely, but it was there. Control. That's what this was. Control wrapped in charm. At the end of the night, when the last car had pulled away and the staff began cleaning up, Sabrina sat down at the table, kicked off her heels, and poured herself a fresh glass of wine. "I think they liked me," she said, spinning the glass gently between her fingers. "They did," Grant replied, loosening his tie. "You're becoming quite the asset." Sabrina smiled faintly. "Careful with that word. I'm not an asset, Grant. I'm a partner." Grant laughed, but something in her tone lingered in the air like smoke. Hours later, when the house was asleep and the security lights dimmed, Sabrina slipped quietly into the study. She unlocked the bottom drawer of Grant's filing cabinet. She'd memorized the key code 2 weeks ago and pulled out a folder marked Q3 Transition, Internal Only. Inside were the preliminary plans for a merger Grant had kept secret from the board. Details even Owen hadn't been told. She scanned the documents, photographed each page with a small device hidden in her bracelet, and returned everything to its place. As she left, she whispered softly to herself. One more week. Back in her apartment, Lena didn't sleep that night. She stayed at her desk, piecing together emails, names, wire transfers, and aliases. She had started a wall chart now, photos connected by red string like something out of a crime show, but this wasn't fiction. This was Grant's life unraveling thread by thread, and he hadn't even noticed. She picked up a sticky note from the corner of the desk, one of Sabrina's old pseudonyms, Leah Nystrom. Lena stared at the name, then added a new pin to the wall. 3 men, 3 cities, 3 ruined reputations. And now, number 4. Lena stood back and looked at the web she'd woven. It was almost ready. Let them play house. The final act was already written. They just didn't know it yet. The morning began with stillness, the kind of eerie quiet that settles over a home right before a storm breaks. But this wasn't a storm of weather. This was the slow accumulation of facts, the stacking of truths so heavy that the foundation beneath them would eventually give way. Lena stood in front of her window, one hand holding her coffee, the other clutching a thick manila folder. The pages inside were warm from the printer, still smelling faintly of ink and determination. On the table behind her, the wall chart had grown. New strings, new names, new discoveries. The pieces were fitting together, and now, for the first time, Lena could see the full outline of what Sabrina, Anna Marenko, was trying to pull off. She had no doubt Sabrina was brilliant. But brilliance could become a trap when paired with arrogance. And Lena had spent far too long being underestimated to not recognize the scent of overconfidence when it walked into the room in designer heels and perfume no one could pronounce. She set her coffee down, opened the folder, and reread the most important page, an old legal document Grant had all but forgotten existed. A trust fund created the year they bought their first apartment together, when their son was just a baby, back when hope still sat between them at the dinner table. The trust had been written with joint custodianship, and though the company it was tied to had since merged and rebranded, the clause within it remained unchanged. According to this legal document, Lena still had shared authority over a portion of Grant's holdings, specifically the McPherson account, the same one Sabrina had started moving funds through. It was a dormant clause, invisible to anyone who didn't look closely. But Lena had learned to look closely. She called Candace first. I need to activate an old clause. Quietly, Candace didn't hesitate. Send me the paperwork. I'll make it disappear and reappear exactly where you need it. Next was Peter. What do you know about a company called Equinox Atlantic? He paused. That's one of the shells tied to Anna's previous scams. It was used to push funds offshore before folding within 6 months. She just rerouted 25 grand into it, Lena said. Grant either doesn't know or doesn't care. Peter exhaled slowly. He won't care until the SEC calls him, which is why we get ahead of it. Lena spent the rest of the day diving through boxes she hadn't touched in years. Old emails printed and filed away, prenuptial agreements with forgotten clauses, loan documents, and receipts. Her past wasn't as clean as she remembered. She'd once been just as ruthless as Grant, just quieter. She hadn't lost her edge. She'd just buried it under the weight of marriage. She found an old hard drive at the back of her closet and plugged it in. A dozen folders popped up, labeled in her meticulous script. One labeled 2007 Joint Ventures caught her eye. Inside were dozens of spreadsheets and PDFs, but one document stood out. A side agreement from a merger where Lena had been listed as a silent partner. That deal had returned millions, and Lena's name was never officially removed from the records. She cross-referenced it with the most recent holdings list Candace had compiled, and there it was, dormant, but alive. If she filed the right motion, she could block certain transactions, or freeze the assets entirely. Lena called James Donovan next. His voice was calm, steady, and exactly what she needed. I need a name, she said. Someone who can quietly file a motion to reassert ownership over a legacy asset. No noise. James didn't ask questions. I'll call you back in 20 minutes. By late afternoon, Lena had what she needed. A corporate lawyer in Connecticut with a reputation for discretion and results. She scheduled a meeting for the next day, digitally signed the necessary access waivers, and forwarded the trust documents with the instruction: verify every signature. Cross-check against current holdings. Then freeze what you can. Jason returned from school just as she was uploading the last file. He looked tired, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his hoodie damp from the drizzle outside. "Hey, kid," Lena said, her voice softer now. He dropped the bag near the couch. "Did you sleep last night?" "Not really. Are you okay?" Lena looked at him, really looked at him. He had Grant's sharp jawline, but her eyes, their depth, their watchfulness. "I'm more than okay," she said. "I'm awake." Jason sat across from her, scanning the chaos of papers and notes. "Are you winning?" She smiled faintly. "I'm not playing to win. I'm playing to finish the game." He nodded, not fully understanding, but trusting her. That was enough. Across town, Grant stood in his home office, reviewing quarterly earnings with Owen. He looked tired in the way men look when they think they've dodged every bullet only to realize one is circling back. "This report from the McPherson Fund," Owen said, tapping a printout, "shows a hold on asset movement. Effective this morning." Grant frowned. "A hold? By who?" Owen's voice was deliberate. "A joint custodian." Apparently, the clause from the original trust was activated. Grant set the papers down. "That's impossible. I have full control. You had partial control. Now it's active again. Someone found the clause." Grant's jaw twitched. "Lena." Owen didn't respond. Grant turned toward the window, watching the light drizzle coat the terrace. "Can she block me?" "If she files the right paperwork, yes. Temporarily, at least. Then kill it. Find a way." Owen folded the report and tucked it into his folder. "She's within her legal right. There's nothing I can do unless she waives it." Grant didn't respond. He didn't move. Later that evening, Sabrina walked into the study, barefoot, holding 2 glasses of wine. "Bad day?" she asked, setting a glass in front of him. He didn't look at her. "Did you touch the McPherson account?" She hesitated. "Only small transfers. Nothing major." He looked up. Someone froze it. Lena's name came up. Sabrina's smile twitched, but she recovered quickly. She's still bitter. Probably trying to make a point. She doesn't do things for points. She does them for outcomes. Sabrina tilted her head, stepping closer. "So let's shift the outcome. Move the funds to a cleaner channel." Grant's eyes narrowed slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you've got holdings in Singapore, in Zurich, accounts not tied to old trusts. Transfer the liquid assets before she ties up more." He studied her face, searching for the usual certainty, but something felt premeditated. She saw the suspicion and leaned down, brushing her fingers against his tie. "I'm here to help you," she whispered. "Remember that." He nodded slowly, but his mind was already elsewhere. Across the city, Lena watched the confirmation come through. Account frozen, motion filed, alert triggered. Everything was in place. She picked up her notebook, flipped to a fresh page, and wrote, "Step 2. Trigger the dominoes." She underlined it twice. The gala was Sabrina's idea. Naturally, she'd insisted it would be good press, as if their lives were just another tabloid feature waiting to be fed. It wasn't enough that she had inserted herself into Grant's business world. Now, she wanted the public to see her as his social equal. No, not equal. Superior. She hired an event planner, someone who had once worked with a pop star and overcharged by a scandalous amount per floral arrangement. She chose the ballroom of the Hawthorne Club, private, gilded, and notoriously exclusive, and transformed it into a fantasy dripping in gold, crystal, and curated illusion. Everything sparkled, except, perhaps, for the truth. The guest list was a who's who of New York elites, media moguls, hedge fund giants, diplomats, a few minor royals flown in for glamour's sake. Invitations had gone out weeks prior, delivered in velvet envelopes sealed with Grant's crest. But Sabrina's name was stamped just beneath his, in gold ink. A detail that did not go unnoticed. Not by the guests, and especially not by Lena. When Lena received the invitation, she had stared at it for a full minute before speaking. "They're really trying to make this official," she murmured. Jason was sitting across from her, sorting through college brochures, but he paused when he saw the card. "You're not actually thinking of going, are you?" he asked, his voice low, cautious. Lena said nothing. She simply folded the invitation, placed it back in its envelope, and slid it into the drawer with the same care one might give to an old photograph or a legal summons. But she was already thinking. The night of the gala arrived with the kind of buzz usually reserved for political campaigns and red carpet premieres. Limousines lined the street in front of the club, and the soft thrum of music could be heard even before guests stepped inside. Paparazzi flanked the entrance, hoping to catch the shot that would grace the covers of society columns. Inside, Sabrina was radiant. Her gown was custom, shimmering with glass beads that seemed to shift colors under the lights. Her hair was pulled back in a dramatic twist, her smile wide and blinding. She moved through the room like a queen in her element, greeting guests with air kisses and expertly timed laughter. Grant stayed close to her, his tuxedo sharp, his demeanor composed. He wasn't one for showmanship in the traditional sense, but tonight he was different, brighter, performative, leaning into the spectacle Sabrina had choreographed. He greeted people he usually ignored, indulged conversations he typically avoided. It was theater, and he knew his role. Around 9 o'clock, just as the speeches were wrapping up and the string quartet was preparing to transition into a jazz ensemble, the room shifted. Heads turned. Conversations dropped. A ripple of recognition moved through the crowd. Lena Hawthorne had arrived. She walked in alone, wearing a dark green gown that clung to her like it had been stitched onto her body. The color was bold, confident, and deliberate. Her hair was gathered in a soft updo, tendrils framing her face in the kind of effortless way that takes hours to achieve. She didn't wear much jewelry, just a pair of emerald earrings that caught the light each time she turned her head. But her presence was enough. Her presence was seismic. Sabrina saw her before Grant did. Her smile faltered for a second, just a flicker, like a light dimming, before she recovered. Grant turned when he noticed the shift, and his face registered something unreadable. Not surprise, not anger, something deeper. He wasn't prepared for Lena to look like this. And worse, he wasn't prepared for her to look like she belonged. Lena moved through the room with the quiet grace of someone who had nothing to prove. She accepted drinks, exchanged pleasantries, even laughed once or twice. But beneath her polished exterior, she was watching. Every exchange, every flicker of tension between Sabrina and the guests, every glance Grant cast in her direction. She noticed how Sabrina's grip on Grant's arm tightened when she thought no one was looking. She noticed the way Grant's smile faltered when Lena passed. And she noticed something else, a man standing near the bar who seemed startled when he caught sight of Sabrina. He narrowed his eyes, leaned in closer, and whispered something to the woman beside him. Lena watched them discreetly. A few minutes later, she made her way to the bar and stood next to the man. "I saw you react to her," Lena said quietly, not turning her head. The man looked at her, startled, then glanced towards Sabrina. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to stare. Do you know her?" Lena asked, sipping her drink. He hesitated. "I think so, but not by that name." Lena turned to face him now. "What name did you know her by?" He looked at her carefully. "Leah Nystrom. She worked with a company in Oslo, managed a portfolio for one of our clients. Disappeared 2 years ago after a scandal. They said she left the country." Lena smiled faintly. "She didn't leave. She just changed names." The man blinked. "Who is she now?" "Grant Hawthorne's fiancée," Lena said, then walked away. The man watched her go, his expression unreadable. Back at the center of the ballroom, Sabrina posed for photos, her laughter a touch too loud, her grip on her champagne glass just a bit too tight. She could feel it, the shift. The center of gravity was moving, and she didn't like it. Lena made her way to a corner table and sat beside James Donovan, who was quietly observing the room like a man waiting for the other shoe to drop. "She's losing control," James said, not bothering to hide the amusement in his voice. "She never had control," Lena replied. "Just the illusion." They clinked glasses, but neither smiled. Half an hour later, just as the music swelled and the lights dimmed for the next phase of the evening, a commotion erupted near the entrance. A man in a dark suit was arguing with the security staff. He was holding something, a small tablet, and his voice carried across the room. "She's not who she says she is," he shouted, pointing towards Sabrina. "That woman's a fraud. I have proof." The crowd turned. Grant stepped forward, face hardening. Sabrina froze. "Sir," Grant said calmly, "I think you're mistaken." The man turned the tablet around and held it up for all to see. On the screen was a photo of Sabrina, only it wasn't a recent one. Her hair was different, the setting unfamiliar, but it was undeniably her. Next to it was another photo, Leah Nystrom, the name clear. And beneath that, an article headline, "Financial Advisor Vanishes Amid Embezzlement Scandal." The room went silent. Sabrina stepped forward, her voice trembling slightly. "That's not me." The man scoffed. "You really want to deny it? After what you did to the Anderson Group?" Grant looked between them, confusion turning into calculation. His eyes flicked to Lena, who stood at the edge of the crowd, her expression unreadable. Security finally moved in, escorting the man out. But the damage was done. Whispers spread like wildfire. Eyes turned. Smiles disappeared. Sabrina stood in the middle of it all, radiant, furious, exposed. Lena walked past her as she exited, pausing just long enough to whisper, "Smoke never lasts long. Not when the mirrors crack." And then she was gone. Back at the apartment, Lena removed her earrings slowly, her phone buzzing with notifications, messages from old friends, business partners, even a journalist she hadn't heard from in years. Jason sat at the counter, wide-eyed. "You planned that, didn't you?" Lena glanced at him. "I just provided the mirror. She brought the smoke." It didn't happen all at once. Power never disappears in a single breath. It slips, fragments, crumbles. And that's what began to happen in the days following the gala. The headlines were discreet at first, couched in speculation and vague allusions. But the gossip pages had a talent for sniffing out blood, and they wasted no time circling Sabrina like a pack of wolves. Mystery woman at Hawthorne Gala raises questions. Is Grant Hawthorne's new flame who she claims to be? From Europe with secrets, what we know about Leah Nystrom. The name followed her like a shadow she couldn't step out of. In the mansion, the atmosphere soured. The staff, once tentative in their deference, now wore tight expressions and avoided eye contact when Sabrina entered a room. Grant, once so publicly proud of the woman he'd replaced Lena with, now answered calls in hushed tones, his face increasingly strained as each day passed. Business partners were calling more frequently, not with congratulations, but with questions, the kind that came wrapped in concern but were soaked in suspicion. Sabrina noticed the shift. She felt it before it became spoken. Her morning coffee arrived colder. Her calls were returned slower. Grant's kisses were quicker. She told herself it was temporary, that the press would move on, that people always forgot. But people weren't forgetting. And Grant wasn't asking the right questions anymore. He was starting to make quiet calls behind her back. She confronted him one evening in the study. He was at his desk, eyes locked on his computer screen, his brow furrowed so deeply it looked carved. She stepped inside, arms crossed, voice cool. "Something you want to talk to me about?" Grant didn't look up. "Should I?" "You've been distant." "I've been busy." "With what exactly?" "Cleaning up messes," he said flatly. Sabrina's jaw tensed. "You mean mine?" He leaned back in his chair finally and looked at her. Really looked at her. "You think I'm not aware of how this all looks? The stories? The photos? People are pulling their money, Sabrina. That gala, your gala, blew a hole through my credibility." "My gala was to help you," she snapped. "No, my gala became your stage," he said. "And now I'm footing the bill." She walked around the desk, leaning against the edge, trying a softer tone. "Look, this isn't the first time the press has exaggerated. You know how these things work." "Do I?" he asked. She studied him, her voice lowering. "Are you asking me something, Grant?" He hesitated. "Who were you before?" "What?" "Before Sabrina Caldwell. Who were you, really?" Sabrina's face twitched, but she recovered quickly. "I'm the woman who helped you close 3 of your biggest deals this quarter. I'm the one who put you in rooms with people Lena couldn't even get appointments with. That's who I am." "But is it who you were?" She stepped back, fury rising in her chest, masked by icy composure. "Is this how it starts then? You get scared and start rewriting history." Grant stood slowly. "I'm not rewriting anything. I'm just asking for honesty." "You don't want honesty," she hissed. "You want someone to blame." He didn't answer, and that silence said everything. She turned and walked out, slamming the study door behind her. Meanwhile, Lena was calm. She watched the unraveling from a distance, careful not to move too quickly. She knew how pride operated. It flailed before it fell. She had already begun re-establishing her presence in places she once left behind. Old clients, board members, charities that had distanced themselves when the divorce became public, all of them were now answering her calls again. Her reputation had never been the problem. Grant's shadow had been, and now that shadow was flickering. She met with James Donovan at a quiet cafe tucked into the corner of a brownstone neighborhood where the powerful went when they didn't want to be seen. "She's on her heels," James said, setting his phone face down. "There's talk about removing Grant from the capital strategy team. People are nervous." Lena sipped her espresso. "That's what fear does. It eats from the inside first. Are you going to make a move?" "I already did. I filed a formal inquiry into the board's ethics policies. If even one member agrees to look at Grant's recent financial decisions, they'll have to open a review. And if they don't," she smiled, "then I release the full report." James raised his eyebrows. "You have the full report?" "I always did." Back at the mansion, Jason showed up unannounced. Grant was surprised to see him and even more surprised when his son didn't ask to come in. He stood on the porch, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "I saw the headlines," Jason said flatly. Grant tried to wave it off. "They're blowing things out of proportion." Jason didn't flinch. "Are they?" Grant sighed. "I get it. You're here to defend your mother. I'm here because you keep screwing things up. You humiliated her, and now you've replaced her with a fraud. Watch your tone." Jason didn't blink. "You watch the wrong people. That's your problem. You always chase the shiny thing." "I gave your mother everything," Grant snapped. Jason leaned in slightly. "No, she gave everything to you, and you spent it like it was spare change." Grant stepped back, but the words stuck. That night, Grant went into Sabrina's room without knocking. She was sitting on the bed, phone in hand, staring blankly at the screen. "We need to talk," he said. She looked up, expression unreadable. "Then talk. I want full access to everything again. Passwords. Accounts. I want to see where the money's going." She laughed, but it was hollow. "You gave me that access, and now I'm taking it back." She stood, walked up to him, and for the first time since they met, her face showed something other than control. It showed contempt. "You don't trust me." "No," he said. "Not anymore." She nodded slowly. "Then you should know something, Grant. If I go down, I'm not going quietly." He didn't move. "I know things," she continued. "About you. About the offshore accounts. About the payments you made under shell names. Do you really want to make me your enemy?" Grant stared at her, but a sliver of doubt had already taken root. He didn't know what she knew, and that terrified him. Across the city, Lena stood in front of her bathroom mirror, washing the day from her face. She was tired, but it was the kind of tired that came with progress. She had been quiet long enough. Sabrina's fall wouldn't be the endgame. It was only the beginning, because beneath every crumbling crown, there was a throne ready to be reclaimed. And she wasn't coming back for permission. It started subtly, like most things that change the course of someone's life. First, a meeting was canceled at the last minute. A meeting Grant himself had arranged with a private equity partner from Singapore. No explanation was given, just a generic email stating rescheduling due to internal developments. Then an investor pulled out of a joint project without so much as a phone call. It wasn't the withdrawal that bothered Grant the most, but the fact that it came with no negotiation, no warning. It was as if the decision had been made a long time ago, and he was simply the last to know. The silence around him had begun to thicken. People were speaking more quietly in his presence, avoiding eye contact, pausing before answering. There was hesitation in the air, and hesitation was dangerous in his world. At first, he blamed the press. Sabrina's scandal, the headlines, the whispers, it had rattled people. He tried to minimize the damage by leaning on old alliances, calling in favors, promising reassurances. But those alliances had shifted. Behind the glossy boardroom tables and designer suits, power was a current, and Grant could feel it beginning to drift away from him. The board of Hawthorne Holdings had been eerily quiet, no official response to recent developments. But Grant knew how the silence of the powerful worked. It wasn't forgetfulness. It was plotting. Sabrina, for her part, had grown erratic. Some days she was cold, calculated, checking her phone obsessively, monitoring transfers, closing accounts. Other days she clung to Grant, all sugar and silk, promising that everything would pass, that together they could ride it out. But Grant no longer trusted her reassurances. He barely trusted his own instincts. He spent more and more time in his office, late nights with half-empty whiskey glasses and spreadsheets open on 3 monitors. Numbers had always made sense to him, but now even the numbers betrayed him. Assets shrinking, liabilities multiplying, audits being requested. He saw the signs. He just couldn't stop them. Lena, meanwhile, was no longer watching from the shadows. She was in meetings, pitching quietly to companies she once helped build from the ground up. She'd gone back to her roots, not to rebuild her past, but to reclaim it. Her presence in the business world was gaining traction again, and fast. Investors who had once only spoken to her through Grant were now requesting her insights directly. She'd learned from the best. Ironically, that meant Grant himself, and now she used everything he'd taught her as a weapon against him. But Lena didn't want public revenge. Not yet. She wanted precision. She wanted Grant to feel it in waves. First the panic, then the paranoia, then the slow suffocation of realizing you're no longer the smartest person in the room. She wanted him to unravel from the inside, like she once had. Sabrina began demanding things: access to emergency funds, updates on properties, a transfer of ownership for a penthouse in Tribeca. Grant began pushing back. He revoked her secondary signatory access to 2 accounts, and the argument that followed was volcanic. "You're cutting me out," she snapped, pacing the room like a trapped animal. "I'm protecting myself," Grant replied. "From what?" "Me." Her voice was sharp, but there was a flicker of desperation now. "I don't know who you are anymore," he said. "Maybe I never did." She stopped moving, just for a second, and in that second, something passed between them. A recognition, perhaps, that the illusion was ending, that the performance they had both participated in was no longer believable. That same week, Lena received a message from a woman named Alina Berg. The name was unfamiliar, but the content of the email made her heart skip. "I knew her as Leah. She worked for my brother's firm in Munich. She disappeared after wiring $500,000 to an account in Cyprus. If you're dealing with her now, I suggest you act fast. She's never stayed in one place this long." Attached was a photo of Sabrina, taken at a gala in Berlin. Same face, different name, same smile. Lena read the message 3 times before responding. She didn't say much. Just, "Thank you. I'm already moving." By now, Lena had all the evidence she needed. Sabrina's real identity, her financial trail, her previous aliases, and most importantly, the link to illegal transfers tied to Grant's business. It was all in a file, time-stamped and secure. She hadn't released it. Not yet. She wanted Grant to realize how deep the cut went before she handed him the blade. She called James. "Is the lawsuit ready?" "Yes. If we file now, it'll go public within 48 hours. "Wait," Lena said. "He needs to feel the weight first." And so, the weight began pressing down. Grant's call logs went unanswered by people he'd considered allies. Sabrina's accounts were flagged by the compliance department of one of their partner banks. Rumors spread of an emergency board meeting. And late one evening, Sabrina overheard a conversation she wasn't supposed to. Grant was in the library, the door slightly ajar, speaking on the phone. "She's unstable. I don't care what documents she has. I want her removed from the estate. I'll take the PR hit. Just make sure the paperwork is clean." Sabrina stood frozen in the hallway, her hand gripping the banister so tight her knuckles turned white. She didn't move until the call ended. The next morning, she was gone. No note, no call, no message. Just a closet half empty and silence where her voice used to echo. Grant was furious, then confused, then quietly afraid. He searched her office, her drawers, her laptop. Nothing. Her phone had been left behind, wiped clean. But one thing wasn't gone. The echo of the words he'd spoken. "Make sure the paperwork is clean." Lena sat across from her attorney that same day, signing the final documents for a motion that would freeze the remaining assets still linked to her name. "You sure you're ready for this?" her attorney asked. "I was ready the moment," he laughed in my face. And when she walked out of that office, the air felt different. Like closure. Like clarity. Meanwhile, Grant sat alone in his study, scrolling through emails that now felt like evidence of his own hubris. The silence was louder now. Sabrina was gone. The board was restless. And Lena was no longer behind him. She was standing directly in front of him, wielding a truth he had ignored for far too long. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. This wasn't a fall. It was a free fall, and he was nowhere near the bottom. It had been nearly a month since Sabrina vanished. but her absence clung to the Hawthorne mansion like cigarette smoke, persistent, invisible, and inescapable. The staff no longer spoke her name aloud, not out of fear, but because they'd learned how fast memories rot when not curated properly. Grant pretended not to notice her missing perfume, her absence from the dinner table, or the empty space in the closet she once insisted be custom-built for her imported shoes. He filled the silence with business calls, wine, and denial. But even denial has a shelf life. When the invitation arrived, Grant thought it was a mistake. A cream-colored envelope with gold script, addressed not to Mr. and Ms., but to Grant Hawthorne alone. It was from the Windsor Foundation, a family-run philanthropic organization with deep ties to old money, the kind of institution that hadn't reached out to him directly since the divorce. The invite read, "Please join us for an exclusive evening honoring contributors to regional community initiatives. Formal attire. Attendance is confirmation of interest in future partnerships." At first, Grant considered ignoring it. He had enough to manage, reputation to rebuild, lawyers to pacify, board members to convince he was still worthy of trust. But something about the language caught his eye. Future partnerships. That meant influence. That meant power. And if nothing else, Grant Hawthorne knew how to chase power even when it slipped from his hands like water. He arrived that Saturday evening dressed in the sharpest tux he owned, crisp collar, shoes polished to a mirror shine. As he stepped out of the Blacktown car, he looked every bit the man he used to be. Or at least, the man he hoped people still believed he was. The venue was a restored manor in the Upper West, a mix of old charm and excessive elegance, like a monument to what money used to look like before social media taught people how to flaunt it cheaply. The stone arches, the string quartet playing something mournful in the foyer, the champagne passed in flutes that cost more than most people's rent. It all whispered class in a way Grant hadn't tasted in months. He made his rounds as he always did, confident, slightly aloof, just enough charm to keep people from asking real questions. But there was an unease in the air, subtle yet present. Conversations paused when he approached and resumed only after he passed. Smiles were given, but not with the same warmth. He felt eyes watching, not admiring, not even judging, but assessing, weighing, like people waiting for something they already knew was about to happen. At the center of the ballroom was a grand staircase that split in two, curving down like arms opening to embrace the room. And at the top of it, just as the quartet shifted to a lighter waltz, stood Lena. She descended slowly, gracefully, her navy gown catching the light in subtle waves. Her hair was styled simply but elegantly, and a silver chain hung from her neck, understated, yet striking. People noticed her the way you notice a change in atmosphere, like a sudden breeze before the storm. She walked through the crowd like it had never rejected her, like she'd never been replaced, and in doing so, erased every whisper that had once dismissed her. Grant saw her just as she reached the bottom step. Their eyes met, and for the first time since their divorce, he didn't see the woman he'd left. He saw the woman who left him, long before he even realized she had started walking away. "Lena," he said, approaching with a stiff smile. "Didn't expect to see you here." She returned the smile, cool, measured. "That makes two of us. You were never much for charity work, as I recall." "I've evolved," he said. "Besides, this crowd could use some optimism. Or accountability," she replied, her voice pleasant, her meaning sharp. Before he could respond, a tall man in a tailored charcoal suit approached. "Lena, would you mind introducing us to the boardroom proposal you mentioned earlier? They're all in the East Wing." "Of course," she said. She turned to Grant. "Excuse me. Duty calls." He watched her walk away, surrounded by people who once orbited him. The power dynamic had inverted, and the room felt it. 10 minutes later, Grant was approached by a woman he vaguely recognized, someone from the acquisition team of a rival firm. She smiled tightly. "Interesting turn of events, Grant. Didn't know Lena was speaking tonight." "Speaking," he repeated. The woman tilted her head. "You didn't know? She's the closing speaker. Her foundation's merging with Windsor's newest initiative. Quite the comeback." Grant excused himself and walked briskly toward the East Wing. Through a pair of French doors, he saw Lena standing beside a projection screen, speaking with clarity and grace. The screen displayed her name, her foundation, and beneath it, strategic partner, Windsor Future Development Fund. It wasn't just a speech. It was a coronation. He didn't walk in. He stood just outside, watching through the glass as she captivated the room. He recognized the look on people's faces, rapt attention, genuine admiration, respect. All the things he once commanded, now redirected to her. And she hadn't needed spectacle or scandal to get there. Just patience and truth. Later that night, as the event wound down, Grant approached the bar for one last drink. The bartender poured slowly, quietly, the way staff do when they've already chosen sides. "You know," came a voice beside him. "There's something poetic about it." Grant turned. It was James Donovan, Lena's attorney. "About what?" Grant asked. James sipped his drink. "Losing everything to the very person you once dismissed." Grant looked at him, not angry, just hollow. "I haven't lost everything." James raised an eyebrow. "Not yet." Outside, Lena stood beneath the stone archway, speaking with the Windsor Foundation's director. When she glanced toward the door, her eyes met Grant's again. And this time, there was no recognition in her gaze. No pain. No nostalgia. Just distance. The kind of distance you put between yourself and something you've outgrown. Grant didn't go to her. He turned away, walked down the steps, and into the night, his driver already waiting. Back at home, Lena closed her bedroom door, removed her heels, and sat in silence. She wasn't celebrating. Not yet. There was still more to come. But for the first time in years, she felt the weight of someone else's undoing, not her own. And the best part? She didn't have to lift a single sword. The morning after the Windsor Gala began with a headline, just as Lena expected it would. It was printed across the front page of the New York Daily Ledger, in bold letters too large for anyone to ignore. Hawthorne legacy under fire. Fraud allegations surface in wake of partner's disappearance. Beneath it was a grainy photo of Grant, taken at some recent public function, mid-step, mouth slightly open, a man caught off guard. And that's exactly what he was. Not just surprised, but unprepared. For the first time in his carefully curated life, Grant had no plan. No rebuttal. No strategy waiting in the wings. Just questions, dangerous ones, and silence from the very people he once trusted. At the bottom of the article, right above the fold, was a sentence that made his stomach twist. Sources close to the investigation indicate financial irregularities linked to offshore accounts previously managed by the missing Sabrina Caldwell, also known as Anna Marenko. Grant sat at the breakfast table staring at the article while the untouched coffee in front of him turned cold. The sun streamed through the wide glass windows, warming the floors of a house that had never felt more empty. The staff had been reduced to a skeleton crew, some fired, some quitting of their own accord. The last few weeks had turned his home into a space of whispers and shadows. Even the once annoying hum of Sabrina's favorite playlist, which used to play endlessly throughout the house, had gone silent. He could hear birds outside, traffic, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the foyer. But no footsteps, no voices, just him, alone, holding his legacy in his shaking hands, reduced to an accusation and a question mark in print. The doorbell rang. Not a buzz, just a deep, old-fashioned chime. It echoed through the foyer with a weight that made him freeze for a moment before standing. He opened the door to find a courier, young and expressionless, holding out a slim black envelope. "Sign here." Grant did, barely noticing his own name on the clipboard. The envelope felt heavier than it looked. He closed the door and took it into his study, careful, cautious. He opened it, unfolded the papers, and read the header. Notice of emergency meeting, Board of Directors, Hawthorne Holdings. The meeting was scheduled for that evening. Unusual. He knew then it wasn't a conversation, it was a coup. He called Owen, his longtime advisor. No answer. He called his COO. Voicemail. His lawyer? On vacation, supposedly. It didn't matter. They weren't going to shield him now. Not after the press. Not after the digital files began circulating. Files that Lena had curated and released. Not to the media, but to the board. Carefully. Quietly. With just enough information to prompt alarm, but not enough to offer defense. She had orchestrated it like a symphony. Slow build. Sharp notes. And now, the crescendo. Lena sat in a small office across town, her laptop open, watching the news coverage unfold in real time. She didn't smile. She didn't lean back or sigh in satisfaction. Instead, she studied the reactions, stock tickers, expert interviews, public opinion polls, absorbing every detail. This wasn't about destruction. It was about exposure. There was a difference. Destruction was personal. Exposure was justice. She hadn't manufactured anything. She simply held up a mirror. The files sent to the board contained detailed transaction logs, time-stamped messages between Grant and Sabrina, and even voice notes recovered from a synced cloud account. Sabrina had left breadcrumbs without meaning to, or perhaps she had always intended to. Perhaps she knew Lena would find them. In one of them, Sabrina's voice was clear. He thinks I don't see what he's hiding, but I see everything. And if I ever go down, I'll make sure he goes with me. There was also a video, low resolution, recorded from a laptop camera. Sabrina speaking into the lens, her tone cold, eyes sharp. I wasn't the only one playing a role. Grant Hawthorne is not a victim. He moved money through me because it gave him deniability. He used me, like he used everyone else. But the thing about mirrors is, eventually someone has to face them. The board watched it in full during the emergency meeting. No one interrupted. When the video ended, no one spoke for nearly a minute. Then came the motion to remove him as CEO. It passed with 6 votes to 1. Grant didn't fight it. He barely said a word. His tie was crooked, his eyes bloodshot, his jaw clenched so tightly he hadn't realized it was trembling. They asked him to leave the building immediately. Security escorted him to the elevator. No ceremony, no handshake, just silence and exit. As he stepped out onto the sidewalk, cameras flashed. Reporters swarmed. He shielded his face with one hand, but he didn't stop. He didn't answer. What could he say? That it was all a misunderstanding? That he hadn't known who Sabrina really was? That he hadn't moved money into her accounts? That she had manipulated him? The public didn't care. They only saw a man who built an empire and lost it. A man who mocked his ex-wife, traded her for a lie, and ended up exactly where no one expected him to be, on the outside, watching it all burn. That night, back at his mansion, Grant sat on the couch with all the lights off. The bottle beside him was half empty. The phone was silent. No calls, no texts, just static on the television he hadn't turned on. The walls felt closer somehow, the ceiling lower. He didn't notice the time, didn't care. He was still in the same suit from the boardroom, his shirt wrinkled, shoes kicked off and forgotten. Then the front door opened. He flinched, confused. Footsteps echoed down the hall, calm, confident. Lena entered the living room with a manila folder in her hands. She didn't sit. She didn't greet him. She simply stood there, studying him the way someone might examine the last trace of something once formidable. "You look tired," she said. He didn't respond. She dropped the folder onto the coffee table. That's everything Sabrina left behind. Bank accounts, passwords, video logs, even the flash drive from your desk. She kept copies of it all. Grant stared at the folder. "Why are you giving me this?" "Because I don't need it anymore," she said. "The truth's already out." He looked up at her, eyes hollow. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing," she said. "Not anymore." He swallowed, his voice breaking for the first time. "You ruined me." "No," Lena replied. "You did that all by yourself. I just made sure people saw it." He leaned forward, head in his hands, silent. And Lena turned to go. But before she reached the door, she paused. "You had everything," she said softly. And still, it wasn't enough. Then she left. And Grant remained on the couch, surrounded by silence, failure, and the echo of a woman he never truly understood. In the weeks that followed his removal from Hawthorne Holdings, Grant became a ghost in the city he once commanded. His name no longer carried the same weight. It rang now like a warning rather than an invitation. Events he used to headline proceeded without him. Company updates were released without his quotes, and reporters who once fawned over his presence now described him in past tense. He remained in the mansion for a time, though its silence grew louder with each day, filling the halls like a quiet condemnation. The grandeur that once made him feel invincible now mocked him in gold leaf and imported marble. He wandered from room to room like a man searching for something he lost but couldn't name, though perhaps deep down, he knew it had never really belonged to him. The servants, what remained of them, moved quietly, some already packing their things as contracts ran out or payments grew uncertain. The piano in the east wing gathered dust. The wine cellar remained untouched. The air inside the estate began to feel heavy, as if the building itself was mourning the decay of its purpose. Grant tried to hold on to something, anything, that could anchor him. He reached out to former partners, all of whom politely declined his calls. Some didn't even respond. Others sent brief texts that read like condolences rather than support. The public, meanwhile, had moved on to fresher scandals. But within the circles that mattered, Grant was done. Not because he'd been caught, but because his fall had made others nervous. Nobody wanted to be the next to stand beside a sinking ship. But Grant still had questions. He still had one name that pulsed in his thoughts, louder than all the noise. Sabrina. Or Anna. Or Leah. Or whatever she called herself now. He wanted to hate her. He wanted to believe she had orchestrated everything. That she was the mastermind, the thief, the one who destroyed his life. But he also knew, in the quiet parts of his mind, that she hadn't done it alone. She had only cracked open the vault. He had left it unlocked. Then, one morning, a package arrived. No sender. Just a small, unassuming box, left on the doorstep. Inside, wrapped in a single sheet of black tissue, was a folded note and a silver flash drive. The note read, "For closure. You were never the mark. You were just convenient." Grant stared at the note for a long time before inserting the flash drive into his laptop. What he found wasn't shocking, not anymore. It was a digital ledger, detailed entries of transactions going back years, cross-referenced with timestamps and internal correspondence. Every transfer, every shift, every rerouted payment. Not just Sabrina's moves, but his own. Mirrored, matched, sometimes traced back to decisions he'd made while assuming no one was watching. But someone had been watching. All along. He closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling for what felt like hours. Outside, the city kept moving. It didn't pause for him. It didn't ask how he was doing. It simply continued. Lena, on the other hand, was not watching from afar anymore. She was rising. The Windsor Foundation had officially named her as a strategic director for the next 5 years. Her name now carried weight again. But this time, it was weight earned not through proximity to power, but through resilience. Her face appeared on panels, in industry journals, at events where legacy and integrity still mattered. She walked into boardrooms not as someone's plus one, but as someone people listened to. Her presence was steady, quiet, and commanding. Jason, now preparing to leave for college, had begun helping her organize the move into a new home, one of her own choosing. No marble floors, no grand staircase, just a place with light, quiet, and enough space to breathe. One afternoon, while sorting through boxes, Jason looked up and asked, "Do you ever miss it?" Lena paused, her hands stilling over a photo frame she hadn't seen in years. It held a picture of her, Grant, and Jason from when he was a child, taken during a trip to the coast. The three of them smiled, all seemingly happy. Seemingly. "Sometimes I miss who I thought I was," she said. "But I don't miss who I had to be to survive it." Jason nodded, folding another blanket and tucking it into a box. "I think you're stronger now." She looked at him, smiled gently. "I think I just stopped pretending." A week later, Lena received a letter, handwritten, unmarked, no return address. She opened it with a cautious calm, already suspecting who it might be from. The handwriting was unmistakably Grant's. "Lena, I don't expect forgiveness. I wouldn't believe I deserved it even if you offered it. I'm not writing to explain. I've done enough explaining to myself, and nothing I say could change what's already been done. I just wanted you to know one thing. You were always right. Not just about her. About me. About everything. I see it now. And it's unbearable. I hope you never feel that kind of weight. I hope you never again have to carry anything that isn't yours. And I hope, sincerely, that you're free." She folded the letter slowly, placing it inside a drawer, not out of sentimentality, but because closure deserved a place, even if it wasn't meant to be revisited. The next morning, Lena stood in front of a crowd at a women's leadership summit. Her speech was about resilience, equity, and rebuilding. But woven through her words was something quieter, something the audience could feel but not quite name. It was the story of a woman who had been burned to ash and who had built herself again without waiting for someone else to hand her a match. Later that day, she stood outside the event hall, eyes lifted toward the pale blue sky. Jason called to tell her he'd landed safely at his college orientation, his voice excited and nervous. She hung up and smiled, watching people pass, the city alive around her. She felt, finally, like a part of it again, not just an observer, not just someone walking in the wake of someone else's ambitions. She was leading her own way now. Across the city, in a luxury penthouse now stripped of its warmth and status, Grant packed his final box. He wasn't being evicted. He had chosen to leave. Whether it was out of shame or an attempt to start over, no one could say. But the building's doorman didn't meet his eyes as he passed. The car that picked him up wasn't his. He'd sold most of his fleet. When the door closed behind him, it didn't echo with the sound of loss. It was just a door, and he was just a man. No empire, no mistress, no throne. Only what was left, dignity, perhaps, or the chance to learn what it meant to build something real. He looked out the window one last time as the car drove away, the skyline shrinking behind him. The city didn't blink, and in that moment, neither did he.